Well, we'll hop right in. Again, this is Medical Gaslighting and PTSD, which is going to be led by Mackenzie Abramson.
Thanks, Tanisha. All right, everyone, thank you guys for joining us. So, as Tanisha said, I'm Mackenzie Abramson. I am the Senior Manager of Research Programs at Global Genes, Research Program Communications at Global Genes. And we are here to talk today about medical gaslighting and living in a medical system that was not built for the outliers or the rare. Rare disease patients are frequently finding themselves and their lived experience dismissed or doubted, and really can frequently encounter medical gaslighting. So medical stress also really leads to chronic mental health issues. And I think that similarly, it's not as understood as common diseases, right? So we are going to talk a lot about various coping skills, different experiences, and how we can prepare for these situations in the future. So I am really honored to have Carla D'Imperio, Suzanne Edison, and Amanda Griffith-Atkins with me, and I'm going to just let them do quick introductions of themselves. We'll start with you, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Global Genes for inviting me to be a part of this panel. My name is Carla D'Imperio. I am the Family Support Specialist for the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation. Has anyone heard of us, Phelan-McDermid Syndrome? A couple? My son was diagnosed at age 1 with Phelan-McDermid syndrome. He's 9 now, so I'm his caregiver. I also, like I said, work for our foundation in our family support, so run our family support programs. I'm from Tampa, Florida, and I'm happy to be here on this panel.
Awesome. Thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Or do I need to speak like this? I'm okay? Okay. I'm Suzanne Edison. I'm the mental health coordinator for the CureJM Foundation. The JM stands for juvenile myositis. My daughter was diagnosed when she's 6 with juvenile myositis, and she's 23. Fortunately, she actually went into remission a little over 10 years ago. So while the disease is not cured, she is off medication and doing pretty well. I have a background as a counselor, and I'm a poet and writer. And I have been coordinating the mental health programs, support programs, research in mental health for juvenile myositis. And I live in Seattle.
Awesome. Amanda?
Hi, my name is Amanda Griffith-Atkins, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Chicago. And I'm the owner and founder of Amanda Atkins Counseling Group in Chicago. I also have a 15-year-old son, Asher, with Prader-Willi syndrome. And it's sort of become my life mission to help parents talk about the hard stuff about parenting a child with a disability, because I think, ironically, it kind of turns us into happier people. So I'm really happy to be here and happy to be speaking on this important topic.
Thank you. So the way this is going to work today is we have a little bit of a presentation for you guys, and then we are going to go into an open discussion. We have some questions prepared, and then we're going to let you guys ask some questions. So I also would like to preface this conversation with the acknowledgement that these experiences and opinions are ours, and we might not represent the diversity in terms of medical gaslighting and what other people might experience as well. So it really just depends on who you're talking to, but we did want to make that acknowledgement. So this is some vocabulary that we came up with that are important things to know. Real quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you know what medical gaslighting is. Cool. That was a lot. Raise your hand if you know what PTSD is. What about complex PTSD? A lot less hands. Okay, so complex or chronic PTSD, we're going to just talk about real quick, is essentially trauma that happens over and over and continuously, or chronic, right? Chronic conditions. So really a multitude of just piling up issues that can lead to trauma that is longer lasting rather than a single moment in time. We have trauma and trauma response. We also have familial trauma, which is generational trauma. We hear those terms a lot. Grief is a big one, ambiguous loss, chronic sorrow, and then I think everyone's probably heard of fight or flight, but who knows what fawn and freeze are? Okay, so there are all 4 different types of responses to trauma or stress, right? So fight, flight, we all know what those are. Fawn is kind of shying away from things or disassociating, and freeze is freeze. So we're going to go into the rest of our slides. We're going to talk about the patient experience first. So on this panel, I am the patient, not the caregiver. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey. I was 25 when I was diagnosed. My first major medical emergency, though, was at 18 months old. So almost 24 years to diagnosis of my first medical condition in 2016. In 2018, I was diagnosed with my second medical condition. Last year, I was diagnosed with 2 more. And this year, I was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune neuromuscular disease. That delayed diagnosis impacted my ability to have self-worth in high school. As a young woman, it was really difficult to know my body and know what was happening. And also, I essentially, I talked a little bit about it earlier for those that were in here, but it really, I was told that I was bipolar, I was told that I was anxious, I was told those are women's issues and I should see an OB. And so all of those things led to me gaslighting myself. I was like, I can't be sick, I'm only 15, I can't have this happening, right? I'm all of these things. And so that also made it really hard when it was time to transition from being a child to an adult. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew something was wrong. I was about 23 when I finally was like, okay, I've had enough surgeries for a 23-year-old. It is time to change things, right? So it really took me becoming my own advocate to be able to do that. I was lucky that my background's in public health, so I know how to do research, which is if you are struggling with diagnosis, I recommend taking a research course so you know what to look for and how to read medical documents. But that's really how I started to become my own advocate. And then even as recently as this year, over the last 3 years leading up to my newest rare diagnosis, no one was listening. I went to multiple doctors. They were telling me, come back when things get worse. I'm like, things are pretty bad, you guys. I'm really not okay. And I think that really made me feel worse and led to a mental health crisis earlier this year that made me decide that I am not going to hide that I'm having mental health issues. It made me want to talk about it with my family, my fiance, my friends, and say, look, this stuff happens. And let's not shy away from it, right? So I really would like to remind everyone that mental health care should also be preventative care. It should not come when it's too late. All of these things should be something we are able to talk about, open to talking about, and, there should be no stigma when it comes to hey, I'm struggling. Do you have time to listen to me? It's that simple. So next I'm going to pass it over to Carla, who's going to talk about the caregiver experience.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing about your own experience. I think coming into this conference as a caregiver, I'm reminding myself there's so many different perspectives here. There's patients, there's all different types of stakeholders. My perspective is as the caregiver and also as the person supporting caregivers. So in my role with the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation, I'm often the first person people talk to after getting their child's diagnosis. I'm leading groups of parents and talking with them and supporting them with our different programs and mental health groups that we have. So I wanted to sort of get the perspective of not just myself. I do think my perspective on this is a little bit limited because it's tainted with privilege. When we start talking about bias and privilege, I come from many of those positions of privilege in gaslighting. So it was important to me to hear from our community. In our foundation, we have about 3,600 diagnosed worldwide, and so I put a survey out to our families and asked them to respond with and share their experience with gaslighting so that I could share with you all beyond just my own perspective. And I pulled some of the quotes, which are on this slide, but one of the most powerful things that I found was I sent this survey out very informally in our family Facebook group, which isn't even a real official group. It's pretty informal. And within 24 hours, I had 50 responses. And they weren't just responses of checking a box. They were long narratives of people sharing traumatic experience of gaslighting and how they had dealt with that as a parent and caregiver of medical gaslighting. I think that all of these quotes are pretty intense, but there's one that says, so many doctors needed to be sternly convinced or cried to for them to take anything seriously. I've said that to my husband before, I really have to gear myself up to cry in this appointment, so they really listen to me. And I think sometimes as a woman, that's part of how you get taken seriously, which is really, really a shame. Perhaps I would have made a different decision about having a third child. These experiences of medical gaslighting can really have an impact on family decision-making, on relationships within families. I was told by the pediatrician that I just wanted a perfect child. I think that's something a lot of first-time parents are told. That's one of the lenses of privilege that we'll talk about is, these new moms, new dads, not having their issues being taken as seriously because it's their first child. And then the one in the middle, I could have saved my child's life. If they had been able to get the diagnosis sooner, they wouldn't have missed out on being eligible for gene therapy and literally could have saved their child's life. So I don't know that it gets much more powerful than that. I was just floored by these comments. And then I also went on to ask the families about what the experts had to say. So what did you hear from the doctors? What did the medical professionals say? And these are all quotes I pulled from the survey as well. She's fine. He's fine. He's just quiet. No cause for alarm. Don't compare him to other children. So many of these quotes, the ones that I made bigger, are because they appeared more than once and they were a common thread of people's experiences. So this is clearly a pervasive problem with caregivers and patients. I think that there's a number of impacts on the caregiver, from financial impacts. I had parents talking about having to quit their job, having to move to find doctors that would take them seriously, leaves of absence from work, all of those things that have a huge impact on the finances of a family. Marital impacts, family relationship impacts, people taking sides. It can really affect, I'm sure that's some of what you will speak to, is that marital and family aspect of things, emotional impacts, and then psychological impacts as well. So that's just on the caregiver. When you look at the patient, you're talking about delaying care and all kinds of different problems that it can cause. So I think that's some of what I pulled from being able to survey my Phelan-McDermid syndrome community, and seeing some people nodding. I think those things probably resonate with a lot of you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carla. We are going to turn it to Suzanne now. Suzanne, I'm hoping you can kind of tell us a little bit about the best way to prepare for these appointments so that we don't have to feel like we're being dismissed or gaslit, and really to avoid having that traumatic experience at every single appointment we attend.
If we're lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before I do that, and as Carla was talking, it made me think of the worst time for me of medical gaslighting, and it took 1.5 years before my daughter got diagnosed. And I don't chalk it up mostly to gaslighting that it took that long, because we all know with a rare disease that you're really going to go from doctor to doctor before somebody quite gets it. But weirdly, in my case, I called my stepdad, who is a neuromuscular disease expert in St. Louis. I was living in Seattle, and I said, my daughter is not doing well. Who should I go to? He recommended a neurologist at Seattle Children's. That didn't work. They said, mild muscle myopathy, and I went back to him and I said, so that's what he said. And he said, well, you can wait a few months. I said, I'm not waiting any longer. It's been 1.5 years. I'm coming to St. Louis. I want you to see her. And what's going to happen? He said, okay, I'm going to set these appointments up for you, and she's going to go through a bunch of tests. I said, well, what kind of tests? He said, well, you don't need to know. I said, I'm her mother. I need to know these things. Well, and finally, after me, just really being upset, this was my stepdad, not that I had lived with him, but you would expect more empathy from someone who was in your family. He set me up with a pediatric neurologist who had 5 kids, and she totally got what I was going through. So that was really important, that I sort of kept saying, I'm her mother, right? I'm her mother. So preparing for medical appointments can look different for everybody, right? And it's different if you're the caregiver, and it's different if you're the patient. And interesting, this morning I was sitting at a table with a woman who's a caregiver, and I said, how do you prepare? What do you take into your appointment? She said, I hardly take anything in anymore, and I pretend that I'm dumb. And this woman had a ton of information. I was listening to her talk. And I said, well, is it different depending on who you're seeing? And she said, yes, but I've learned that if I go in with all this information, people dismiss me right away. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's kind of opposite to what I would think personally. But that may be true for so many people because often doctors think that they're God. And so it's very hard for us to learn how to go into an appointment, and everybody's going to be different. Every specialist you see, if you're lucky, you're going to get somebody with empathy. So here's what I'm going to say to you, and you take this all with a grain of salt. At home, before you go into your office, you need to prepare yourself emotionally, and I know that Amanda's going to talk more about that. But there's a couple of affirmative statements that I like to say to myself. I know myself. I know my child. Okay? I may not know everything that's going on with them or with me, but I know what I feel, what I see, and what I experience, okay? Those are three. And if you need to write these down, you should write them down, because I'm a writer. I believe in writing. I believe that writing helps you contain feelings and emotions so that you're then able to advocate more when you're in a situation that's going to be a little more demanding of you intellectually, because we're all going to feel flooded from time to time with our emotions, and we want to be able to present both a sense of organization, but they will know, I think doctors will know that we're emotional. This is either about ourselves or about our child. And then if you have pain, this is another piece I think that's really hard when you go into a doctor's office and they say, okay, I have pain, and they'll say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, right? Or if you're with a kid, show me the face of the kid, you know, what they're feeling. And if the kid is old enough or articulate or verbal, maybe they can do that. But I highly recommend that you think about, where is the pain? What's the color of the pain? What's the shape of the pain? If the pain were a character, who would it be? Who would it look like? Is it a fictional character, a real character? Is it an animal? What is it, you know, so that you have all these qualitative descriptions for pain, because a number doesn't do it. Mm-hmm. And pain is probably the most subjective experience that we all have. So that's another piece that I think is important. And then if you need to compare it to something else, go ahead and do that. So I try to write things down and what are the questions that I really want the doctor to answer, and I'm not going to leave the office until I get those questions answered, but it's really important to me. Eventually, because we were in treatment for so many years, and I'm sure all of you have giant binders, and if you don't, you need to have a binder or a folder or, you know, a file folder where you keep clinic summaries, and I kept a day-to-day diary of just what was going on with my child. Are we okay? Did I hit something? Okay. And then I would, you know, at least I would have those at my fingertips if I needed them, you know, and just walking in with this binder. My daughter would say, Mom, do you have your binder? And so I would, you know, go in. And again, I would want to make sure both that the doctor talked to my child, but also that I had time to talk to them. And once they get to be a teen, then there's going to be a little bit of difference there, particularly if they have verbal capacity and, you know, they want to be able to express themselves, and you want to be able to also model for your child how to talk to them, but you also want the doctor to talk to the child. I'll leave it there for right now. I know that I've put some stuff up on the board, on the slides, so feel free to take screenshots of that. Be specific, I think that's a really important piece. Oh, the last little piece I'll say is, most of our cell phones now have voice memo or recording devices, so if you don't have somebody to go with you, I highly recommend that you ask the doctor if it's okay if you can record, because you're not going to remember everything, right? So it's really important that you do that. That's what I would recommend. Usually they'll let you do that. Taking notes is important if you can do that, but it's sometimes hard to take notes and listen at the same time. So that's my little piece.
Do you want to go over your second slide?
Sure. List of questions you want answered, right? Leaving the room to write your answers down. Oh, this is the last little piece is really important to me. Before I go into the office, or even when I'm sitting in the office, you can do a really short breathing thing called box breathing. Does anybody know what box breathing is? Yeah, so we can, you know what, let's just practice it right this second. It's really simple. So you might want to close your eyes and just look down, or just look down if you don't, because in your doctor's office you may not be closing your eyes. But, so you would take a deep breath for 4 counts, and at the top of the 4th inhale, hold it for 4 counts, and then exhale for 4 counts, and then keep the exhale out for 4 counts, and then start again, inhaling 4 counts, and I guarantee you that it is going to slow your blood pressure down, and it's going to help you ground. Inhaling 4, hold 4, exhale 4, and hold 4. Okay, simple things.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Yeah.
So Amanda is in counseling. She works in counseling. So Amanda, can you share your thoughts on, how can we self-soothe more of what Suzanne just led us through? And really, how do we manage our emotions in a bigger sense, like outside of these appointments, right? Because those are very time specific, but what about when that trauma carries with us, right? So how do we manage our emotions and regulate and, I don't want to say compartmentalize because that's not always the best option, but how do we separate the things that do bring us joy and make us happy from these situations that the caregivers and the patients are living in?
Well, first off, thank you, Susan, for letting us all do deep breathing before my speaking part. That was really helpful to relax myself a little bit before. So I want to talk briefly about how our brain stores trauma so that we can better understand what's coming up for us when we say, oh, we're struggling with PTSD or we're struggling with trauma. So like, for example, let's say that you go to a museum and you see this beautiful painting. You notice the smells around you. You can see like the beautiful woodwork on the picture frame. You notice the texture. You're having this like really beautiful experience. You go home and that night you might kind of remember the texture on the picture frame. You might sort of remember the strokes on the artwork. But a couple days later, you're going to start to lose that deeper sensation, and you're just going to your brain is going to store that as like, oh, that painting was really beautiful, and I really enjoyed that experience. That's going to be kind of like the memory that you store. And if your brain were to be hooked up to some sort of brain imaging, we would see that when that memory pops up in your head, it pops up in past tense, right? So it's like it's an actual memory that's stored away. When trauma is brought up in imaging, our brain actually sees it in the here and now. So let that sit for a second. Anything traumatic that you've been through, when your brain brings it up, your brain is processing it in the here and now versus a memory that happened 2 years ago. So let's say whether you're a patient or a caregiver, if something's triggering you, your brain is thinking, oh my gosh, this is a threat to me right now. So first and foremost, we need to recognize that to validate ourselves, right? Like so much of gaslighting is feeling invalidated, being invalidated about something that happened to us. And so I think it begins with kind of regulating our traumatic responses begins with validating ourselves. So I share that information about how our brains register trauma so that you can tell yourself, of course I'm feeling traumatized. Of course I'm feeling fearful in this moment when I know everything in the here and now is safe because my brain remembers that thing that happened 3 years ago where I almost died or where my child almost died, right? So our brains think the trauma is happening in the here and now. So the main way to regulate yourself when you're feeling those kind of like feelings pop up, whether it's panic, anxiety, however trauma sort of manifests itself for you, is to bring yourself into the here and now, right? So one way to do this, and maybe you've read about this, it's a very common thing that we see in dealing with trauma, is to use your senses, right? So I'm sitting in this chair, I can feel the leather, it feels cold and smooth. I can feel the ground under my feet. I can see the lights. So I'm doing these very simple things to bring myself into the here and now, to remind myself that I'm sitting here on this stage, not in a hospital room with my child who just had a seizure, right? So use that very simple skill to bring yourself into the here and now. I think that's kind of our biggest protector against kind of feeling triggered by PTSD, because we're bringing ourselves here, where in this moment right now, I'm safe, even though my brain's telling me that I'm not. And so that, to the next point, understanding our trauma response, we can read online or, hear other people say that my trauma response is X, Y, Z, but I would encourage you to really understand, how does it impact you personally? And this could be all the way down to like, I notice myself disassociating, or I notice myself sweating. For me, I really notice that it's very hard for me to be in the present moment when I'm feeling those old trauma. Like, for example, if my son is sick, right? This is a huge trigger for me, and any caretakers in the room, you might feel the same way. When your child gets a virus or something weird is going on medically, that fear of like, oh my gosh, are we gonna end up in the ICU? Are we gonna be hospitalized? Like, how bad is this gonna get, right? And so noticing what comes up for you when you're feeling triggered, and being able to kind of have a bird's eye view of that. So if you notice yourself feeling that way, you can say, okay, I'm feeling triggered right now. I know that this is my trauma coming back. I'm really anxious about this medical situation, and I'm just gonna take a minute to ground myself and calm myself. This isn't you saying everything's gonna be fine, right? I always see those kind of like things on Instagram where it's like, 90% of the things that we worry about will never happen. Well, in the rare community, unfortunately, we're the 10%, right? So those kind of cliched responses don't work with us. And you might be like, well, I read this stuff, but it doesn't actually help me. So again, validate yourself. Of course, that doesn't help you. You or your child has a 1 in 50,000 diagnosis. These like kind of broader statistics don't bring us comfort. So, and then kind of practicing relaxation methods. Again, this one kind of makes me LOL, because when I'm in a panic, it's very hard for me to practice relaxation methods, but I think accessing it when we're in a calm space to kind of practice will help us access a little bit more when we're feeling panicky. And my last point, which is huge, and I can't stress this enough, but it's just simply find support. Like when I'm having a panicky moment, my biggest lifeline is texting one of my best friends and being like, I'm losing it today. I'm not okay. And having them be like, oh my gosh, let's hop on the phone and just talk through this. And no one's gonna solve my problem, right? Nobody's gonna find a cure for PWS. None of my friends, at least, I don't think. But they will answer the phone, talk me through it, help me like catch my breath a little bit, and remind me that I'm not alone. And I think in these moments where we're feeling triggered, where we're feeling panic, where we're struggling with PTSD, at the end of the day, we just need to know that we're not alone, and there's somebody kind of willing to walk through life with us. So whether that support is a friend that you call, your therapist, a group, or just kind of your community, your online community, your in-person community, I think that's something that we can all be working on when we're not in crisis, developing that community, so that when we're in crisis, we can call on our people to help support us.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. I love that you said that you kind of LOL at the relaxing, practice relaxing moments, because I find that there's nothing more triggering for me than when someone says, calm down, right. Don't worry.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Right? Like,
that's
okay,
it.
It's super easy to do, I promise. All right, you guys, so this is our presentation for you. We are gonna move on to live polling, so everyone get out your phones. So we have 3 questions that we would like to ask you guys. So, they should be yes or no questions in the poll. Can everyone see the polls in your app?
The QR code.
The QR code. Tanisha, do you have the QR code? There's no questions? Okay, we're gonna go old school. Put your phones down.
Dang, wanted to see that.
We're having QR code issues? Okay, everyone put your phones down. We're gonna do good old hand raising. Yeah. And if you're in our virtual community, drop like a something in the chat, okay, guys? So we know you're there with us. So raise your, I'm going to read it old school then. Raise your hand if you feel your mental health or as a caregiver or a patient, either one, has been impacted by you or your patient's medical conditions.
Wow. More than one hand.
Yeah. All right. Keep your hand raised if you have sought out therapy specifically because of rare disease and your health issues. Now keep your hand raised.
And medication.
Yeah. If you have ever taken anti-anxiety or anti-depression medication to help you cope with these issues. All right, and lastly, keep your hand raised if you feel like that medication has been a beneficial experience in your life or your patient's life. Amazing. Thank you guys for participating old school with us. So we are going to move on to, we have some prepared questions and we have like 27 minutes left. So we're going to do some questions and then open it up to you guys, I think. So Carla, I want to start with you because we talked about it on my slide a little bit, but my experience with having a delayed diagnosis has significantly led me to gaslight myself, to question every aspect of my life, and to really, you know, my mental health, honestly, just as a young person growing to adulthood. So I would like to know, what is the impact that delayed diagnosis has had on you or the families that you talk to, working with them? How does that impact their mental health or their child's mental health, and how does that work for them?
I think that for my own perspective, my son was diagnosed at about 1 year old. So there were like 15 months of questioning what was going on with him. We knew something wasn't quite right, but it wasn't years and years of delayed diagnosis, right? So it's a little bit different from my perspective. However, I will say during that time, I remember just combing through, Googling every symptom, and I would put rare genetic disorder after the symptom because I knew in my heart it had to be something genetic. I remember one of his physical therapists telling me, and it was one of the quotes on the slide, he doesn't look syndrome-y, so it's not a genetic syndrome.
What does that mean?
I mean, and Phelan-McDermid syndrome is, we have mild dysmorphic features, so I guess we look less syndrome. I don't know what that means, but that was really, I liked her. We had a great, you know how it is with therapists, you have to build this relationship and you're with them all the time. And so I worked really hard to have this great relationship with her. And so that felt very, it made me question that and question myself too, because this was someone I trusted and someone that I went to a birthday party at her house. We were friendly. So that puts a whole different dynamic on it as well. In our community, often, we do get older individuals diagnosed with Phelan-McDermid syndrome in their 20s when they may start having neuropsychiatric episodes that prompt genetic testing. We also have older, by older I mean in their 20s and 30s, adults. Perhaps their siblings want to start their own family and say, hey, mom and dad, you think we could get my brother or sister some genetic testing so I know if I'm a risk if I decide to have children, if I have a risk of passing it on. So we do have that population where they've been undiagnosed for decades, and those families, it really does affect their identity as a parent. Mm-hmm. There is so much guilt around feeling for years and years like it was their fault. Somehow they caused the diagnosis, or it was something that they did rather than actually having a diagnosis, a concrete answer, right? The doubt affects people's self-esteem. I think that's what you're talking about as a young woman, and trying, that's a really difficult age to go through all of that. So that's, I do see that in the caregivers, and if it affects your self-esteem, it's going to affect your confidence in being able to advocate for your child in the future. What I will say is I always like to, look for the hope in things. I think that's kind of the theme of the week here.
It is.
One of the things that came through in the survey that I sent out to our families was some positive quotes, like there was, I have a couple of them written down. I became stronger. Medical gaslighting has given me confidence in knowing my child and how to stand up to medical professionals. I'm now a strong advocate. So I do think there is, a bit of a silver lining in if you can get through it, there is a stronger piece on the other side, but it's at what cost, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But something you just said, I want to go to Amanda, because you said someone's quote was, medical gaslighting made me stronger, right? But I also, Amanda, I'm wondering if there's ways that we can, as caregivers or patients, respectfully tell a medical professional, like, hey, you're being mean. Like, quite frankly, you're making me feel bad, you're being mean. Like, how do, because I have practice now, but I would not, normally I'm feeling triggered, and in the moment, I just want to be like, okay, I'm leaving, bye. Right? So how do I do this respectfully?
Yeah.
And what advice do you have for everyone here to tell these medical professionals, I'm feeling triggered, I don't feel like you're hearing me? Like, how do we go about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I also want to add, and we talked about this as we were prepping, I don't think all doctors do this intentionally, right? It's not like we want to view doctors as part of an important part of our care team. And we want to believe that they're going to use their power for good and they're going to help us. Doctors are humans too, right? And so we don't want to paint doctors out to be these careless people, of course. But I think that, first of all, doctors are probably overworked, right? And we're rare. So they're not expecting to, why is the zebra our model, right? Because the doctors are said, when you hear hooves, look for a horse, right? And it's not always a horse, sometimes it's a zebra, right? We're the zebra. And so I think when we're thinking about how do we let the physician know that we're not being taken seriously, first of all, we have to calm ourselves, right? No, they're not going to listen to us if we're coming in hysterical. So there's that first step of trying to be like, take a deep breath. Okay, I'm not feeling heard right now, right? So just say it. There's no perfect art to it, but I think we have to try and remain as calm as possible. And simply say, I'm not feeling heard. Is there another way that we can go about talking about this? Or I don't think you're fully understanding the depth of what I'm trying to communicate to you. Slow down, because doctors also, they have 12 minutes with us, and then they're on to their next patient. So we just have to kind of force them to slow down. And I think when it's all said and done, if you consistently feel dismissed by your provider, and again, this is not easy advice that I'm giving us, especially if we're in rural communities or there's limited providers, but we have to find providers that we feel respect us and that we feel will actually listen to us. So there's this big part of me that wants to be like, we'll just find another provider. I know that it's not that easy. That's a real privilege within insurance and whatnot, but slow down, say exactly what you're feeling, and kind of check in with yourself and think, what am I? That's why I think it all for me comes back to self-awareness too. What is it that I'm feeling? I'm feeling anger right now. Why am I feeling anger? Because this doctor is completely dismissing me. Okay, can I just have a few more minutes of your time? Because there's something that I want to say to you that I feel like you're not fully understanding, and just be direct. And again, particularly as women, I think we're conditioned to be kind and, oh, thank you so much. And right, so it's no, I'm going to be assertive. I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm feeling. And before I leave today, I want to make sure that we're understanding and that you really understand what it is I'm trying to say to you. So don't be afraid to be confident. Don't be afraid to be assertive. And also, we have to be kind. We have to be respectful, because we know that if we go spouting off exactly what we want to say, we're going to lose them. So there's a strategy to it, right?
And I think also, if you know that, so for example, I'm going to a neuromuscular doctor in January. I know I will be overwhelmed. This is a new diagnosis. This is a lot. And I already told my fiance and my mom, you're both coming with me, and here's the 2 questions that have to be answered before we leave. Yeah. So if I can't say them, you say them for me. And so making sure that you have those tools or those resources or a friend or a family member that can go with you, who knows what your objective is, who knows what you need to leave with, and making sure that that happens if you are feeling triggered. They don't suffer from PTSD or trauma, and they know that sometimes I can't relax and I can't calm myself, and so they will help me. And so Suzanne, to that point, What are your thoughts on how important it is to have that support from community and family prior to diagnosis or at the time of diagnosis? Because we know what can happen after if you didn't have support. So how do we make sure that we are preparing our whole families to understand what we're going through?
Boy, that's really hard, because until we really know what we're dealing with, it's often hard to get the support that you need. So I think that what's important is that you can let a friend or your partner, if you're partnered, or sibling, or whomever you feel most trusting, if you can really say to them, look, I'm struggling with something, it's either with yourself or with my child, we don't know what it is, I'm feeling really anxious, here's what I need from you. I don't want you to tell me that it's going to be okay. I don't know if it's going to be okay. What I really need is for you to just listen. I think listening is like the biggest thing that we can get support from, because just like we want the doctor to hear us, we want our support system to hear us. And there's so many people who get anxious when we're anxious, right? I mean, they don't know, most people don't know how to help. I don't necessarily even need them to help. I need them to listen and to be there with me. Hold my hand, give me a hug, whatever it is that feels good to you, that feels supportive, right? I mean, sometimes it's just, call me tomorrow, I can't talk today. Please come over and have dinner with me. Go for a walk. I don't even know if I'm going to say anything. I'm just going to, I need to be with somebody. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I wanted to say about the gaslighting is, and I said how to prepare for the doctor's appointment. Take those questions into the doctor, and just, if you can't say it and you don't have somebody who's there to support you, hand them the piece of paper. This is what I need you to pay attention to. This is what I know. This is what I've experienced. These are the questions I have to have answered. Make sure that they have that right in front of them.
I think on that front too, you can utilize some of the portals that many doctors have. I've found my son will have like little seizures that we don't really, he just had a little seizure, we don't document it. Then when the time comes that he has a bigger seizure, the doctor, he hasn't had a seizure in 6 months. Oh no, he's had all these other ones. See, I kept track of them in my phone when I texted my husband about them. Well, it's not in his medical record. So now anything, I message them on my chart and I have it then documented. Any questions you have ahead of time, you can send it to the doctor ahead of time and get them. Maybe they can't answer it all, but at least it's written down there, and maybe they can answer some of them beforehand. Same with afterwards. If you leave and you remember, oh my gosh, I forgot to ask. I do that all the time. I forgot to ask this really important question. You can message them after. So use that. I think that's a really important tool that can be beyond just keeping track of the appointments and the blood pressure and all of that, but you can use it to communicate.
So before we go into questions from the audience, I'm gonna ask one question to all three of you. And before I do that, can I get a show of hands? Who in this room is a caregiver? Whoa. Who in this room is a patient? Okay.
And are you both?
Yeah, raise your hand if you're both. That's a good one. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna ask you guys to answer first, and then I'm gonna go after as a patient. So, for our caregivers, how would the three of you encourage your little ones, or adults if you're a caregiver to an adult patient, to share their feelings with you open and honestly, so that they don't end up with medical trauma and PTSD? Anyone?
Well, I think that's different at different ages.
Okay.
Right? So when my child was 6, there was really not much she could tell me about, because it all was just who she was in normal life, right? And it hadn't sort of evolved over time, and she was losing capacity to stand or walk or tie her shoes, and she was in pain, but she didn't know why, and we didn't really know how much pain. And so it was very difficult to try to grasp it. And I would ask her, does it hurt here? Does it hurt here? Or, what is, it was normal for her, right? She didn't have anything to compare it to. If they're older and they're an adolescent, and I have lots of friends who have, who have been adolescently diagnosed and then become young adults and could say, I don't know, something was weird and I really needed somebody to listen to me. And I would encourage them to just tell me everything you can. Tell me everything about your what does it feel like inside your body? You know, are you unhappy? Are you noticing that you can't pay attention in school? Are your friends like asking you weird questions? Like, are you okay? Are they asking you that more than normal? You know, so how do you elicit that information? And what if your child is nonverbal? I think that's really the hardest part. So you have to be observing their behaviors and their changes and trying to document all those pieces that you can be aware of. And maybe you've got a system of communication. You know your child best. Okay, so you're gonna know on some level that there's something wrong and how to describe it and talk to them about it. And it's okay to say, you know, I've noticed that you're not hanging out with your best friend as much as you used to. Is there something going on? And can I say one more thing before you guys answer the rest of it? This is like my mission in life, is to say that mental health and physical health are not separate. So everybody should have mental health support from day one. This is preventative. This helps you all the way through the whole process and really can help alleviate some of the anxieties and stresses and actually can help with healing. So the less stress we have, the less inflammation we have, the less disease we will have over time. So that's my PSA.
I can speak a little bit to the perspective of the child that doesn't speak. So I don't know what his experience is with medical gaslighting, really. I think that we have to make decisions about when do you try and find a different way for a medical procedure, like making sure that we go to the place where the blood draws they're really good and it's not traumatic. We hold his iPad, he doesn't notice, versus this, we actually just have to hold him down and do this procedure today. And that's really hard to figure out those two different approaches on someone who can't explain or reflect on his experience, even though I know he takes it all and internalizes it. So I think that also really affects the caregiver in terms of the trauma of having to not only make the decision, but then sometimes having to literally hold your child down and force a medical procedure on them. I don't know if that gets at the question a little bit.
I think so. Amanda, what are your feelings?
I don't really have much to add. The only thing I would add is that as caregivers, we have to create space for these discussions, and that if our kid says something to us that we don't like, we have to manage our response, right? Because if my child says something to me that I'm feeling anxious about, or I have this huge reaction, he's less apt to tell me about it next time. So I think a lot of it is navigating our own response to what it is our kids are saying. Like if my son tells me he's not feeling well and I start to go into a panic about it, he's gonna become aware of my response and maybe be like, oh, mom freaks out, so I'm not gonna do that next time. So just being like, thank you for telling me. Like, let's think of, like, let me see if I need to make a doctor's appointment. Let's find out what's going on. So navigate your own response and also hear your children. If they're struggling with something, it's okay to take a mental health day. It's okay to seek support. It's okay to take the day off school because they're feeling overwhelmed. The more seriously we take their concerns, the more likely they are to come to us.
Amazing. And I think as a patient, I want to speak to all the caregivers in the room. Two things. One is just believe them. Just believe them when they tell you they're hurting, or believe them if they are nonverbal and their actions are showing you that something's up. Like, just believe and know yourself, and like you said, your child. It really, that's all it takes. The other thing I just want to say is this journey is not really a journey, it's a battlefield, and it sucks. And we can acknowledge that. And I also just want to encourage everyone to not beat yourself up. I know that's a lot easier said than done, but I do know that both of my parents, when we finally started getting diagnosis after diagnosis, had their own trauma. And they were like, what the heck did I do to my child? And it wasn't their fault. And it's not your fault. And I think that that's really important to remember, because it's not going to end either. Like, I have these diagnoses and I will have them forever. And my family will have to deal with them forever. So just remember that it's not all on you when your kid is sick. It's not. So we have a little over 8 minutes. We have time for a couple of questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, first off, let's give a hand clap to our fabulous panel. I have 3 kids, and so I felt like I was getting a parenting lesson at the same time of learning about gaslighting and correcting myself in my mind about what I should be doing. So we'll take some time. I also want to thank you all for being, and this is why I love the rare disease space, for being so open to just raising your hand for our polling questions when technology doesn't work. Okay, so we'll try to get like 1 or 2 questions in. And I saw these 2 hands, so I'll make sure I get to both of you. Excuse me.
Thanks. I wanted to ask, is the medical community aware that they could be inflicting PTSD on their patients? And if not, how do you address that or hold them accountable?
Yeah, so the question was, for those that didn't hear, is the medical community aware that they might be inflicting trauma or PTSD on their patients? And if they aren't, or they are, how do we prevent that from happening? So one of the things I do, coming from a public health background, is I worked with the medical school at the college I went to. We had our first rare disease day after I was diagnosed, and teaching them that this is like a thing in their communities. I think most medical professionals know that this is a possibility with any sort of, some people, raise your hand if you're afraid of the dentist. Okay, right? So, I think most people have some sort of trauma when it comes to medical appointments in one way or another, because dental work's not fun, right? And so I'm really open with my doctors, and that's how I get my other doctors to know this. First of all, I also have a formal CPTSD diagnosis, and I'm not afraid to tell people that anymore. I was for the longest time. But now, every doctor appointment I go to, it's in my chart, and they know, like, this patient needs more empathy than I might give other patients. And I think that's really important. And as a therapist, right, like that's, you guys are more equipped than physicians to handle these emotions, but I think there's ways that we can go about teaching them that, like, handle with care, right, is like a common theme in the rare disease community, but that also means handle my mental health with care.
Awesome.
I think too, acknowledging it as a problem doesn't mean that every doctor is guilty, or in general, I think doctors really want to help people, and sometimes medical gaslighting is a function of them just trying to make you feel better, like, reassure you, with good intentions. So I think being able to have, it's similar to having conversations about self-reflection about privilege and other things that can be hard to think about and hard to talk about, but it doesn't mean it's that person's personal fault. It's more of a, like, let's reflect on a systemic issue and talk about it. So I think just talking about it, just being able to have a conversation in a mature way is helpful.
Awesome. Last question.
I want to know about.
Hold it up to your.
Okay, it is. I agree. It is systemic. 15 minutes for the rare person just isn't enough. However, a lot of times there are glitches within the system that impact the rare, right? You might have appointments that are, let's say you have physical issues, you can't come, and because you can't come regularly, they're going to say you're non-compliant, and then you get kicked out. So as you know, me, I am a caregiver, and also I am a process improvement person, and I also have a medical background. So, as I inform them calmly, this is what's going, can you flag? A lot of times, they don't want you in their space, even if you should be. And as far as bringing in, I documented things from my kiddo, and I would bring them in and even bring in educational documents. And one doctor actually sat me down and said, can't read this. What if every patient came in with this? And even when my daughter was younger, I took her to someone, and in front of her, they said, you're too young to have all these issues. You cannot help me. I cannot help you. But they're not aware of what impact that is having for that person. And I think one of the things that I've had the privilege of doing is being on like a research group that said, you know, what do doctors need to do? And it's like empathy training.
Yeah.
That is now the thing, but, you know, and that, what is it? Trauma care, whatever it is. Shouldn't you treat all patients with empathy? I mean, do you have to have some catastrophic event? And a lot of times they are creating it. I know I have trauma from being a caretaker and not me personally feeling heard too. So I think it's just that balance of power, because you need them, but you also need to be heard. And, you know, to me, it's just a delicate balance. And I'm gonna be honest, I fall off the curve sometimes. And, but my major objective is to get the services I need for my child who is suicidal. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing something that's gonna increase her suicidal ideation, I need to make you stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Any comments before we close it out?
I'll make a real quick one about, so I think Mackenzie alluded to it before, that this is, it's not a one and done kind of, and Amanda talked about it too. It's not post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It's an ongoing stress response or chronic stress response that we're having. I don't know what, you know, I didn't hear all of what you had to say, but I was thinking about how being able to I've had to be not nice. I mean, I think I've gotten to the point where it's okay that I am not nice if I need to be, right? I need to get the message across that this is important. I'm not leaving this place until I have some answers. And I'm sorry that you're not listening to me. Maybe I need to talk to somebody else. You know, I mean, you're really going to have to just lay it on the line sometimes. And to Carla's point, people want to help, and I think a lot of the younger doctors are getting more training in mental health and empathy. That's my experience. But there's some people just have natural empathy. Some doctors do. And again, the stress and the pressure of being in a 12 or 15-minute appointment can also, you know, weigh over on what's happening. So,
well, and I think also patients and caregivers are the lived experience experts, right? So there's this saying, you know, don't mistake your one lecture you had on my rare disease with my 33 years of living with it. So just remember, you are the expert in your own body, your child's body, your care, everything that you need to make sure that, you know, it is sustainable to be around. And I think that that's really important to take away. So we are out of time. If you guys have more questions, we will all be around. So thank you, Carla, Suzanne, and Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.